But I think that's a good segue into something else, the second topic we want to cover tonight. And in a little deviation from our usual format, I'm going to take the lead, and I'm going to ask Chris what he thinks about the hour-long interview Billy did with noted conspiracy theorist and radio host, is that true? Alex Jones, a resident of Austin, coincidentally. Not to be confused with Art Bell. But Chris is something of HU's resident advocate of science. And I don't know, maybe that's saying too much. But I'll let Chris speak for himself. But they covered a variety of topics. A lot of things Billy has not spoken much about in the past publicly. Particularly, I don't want to say politics, but let's say political philosophy. Questions of, culture. And, some really interesting stuff. I have things to say about it, too. Let's let Chris start. Chris, reactions to Billy Corgan on Alex Jones. Was he crazy? Was he not crazy? Do you like what he had to say? Is Alex Jones crazy? Should Billy have gone on this program? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I would agree with your assessment that I am HU's resident science person. So I don't know if that's
science correspondent.
The best way to say it. I'm not like Bill Nye or anything like that.
Reporting tonight from science, I'm Chris.
If only you were. I like Bill Nye.
When I first heard about this interview, I don't know if I want to say terrified. I was more giddy, like in anticipation of the crazy stuff, that Billy could possibly be talking about. I actually wasn't familiar with Alex Jones before this, but I mean, I did a little bit of Googling about him, and there was a lot of stuff about Alex Jones has never met a conspiracy theory he doesn't agree with, and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, based on what Billy has said in the past, both on Twitter and on his website, Everything From Here to There, Billy has also espoused some conspiracy theories, particularly the chemtrails issue. I was expecting just a full-blown hour of crazy, which in retrospect I shouldn't have been expecting. I mean, I've experienced Billy Corgan as a public figure for a number of years now, and I don't know why I would think all of a sudden he would come out and just act like a completely crazy lunatic after many, many years being in the public eye and not really doing that. So, I mean, I guess, first of all, I have to give Billy quite a bit of credit for his appearance in this program, even though I think he agrees with a lot of the stuff that Alex Jones says, in that are some of the more crazier conspiracy theory type things. In this interview, Billy was fairly measured, especially in the face of Alex Jones spouting some pretty aimless, non-specific claims. And I posted a comment about this. As I was watching this video, I posted a stream of comments to hipstersunited.com.
You're totally right!
Pumpkins. Yeah, that basically was it. So Billy would talk for a minute or two and, kind of see both sides of something and be very careful about explaining his position. And Alex Jones would just bust in with bogus numbers. Just like out of nowhere, just like he couldn't go more than 2 minutes without saying something. He just had to.
Yeah, it's a load of crap.
Exactly. And Billy, a number of times, he does defer to Alex Jones by not necessarily agreeing with him, but saying, well, Alex, you did the research on this, so I'll defer to you. And if this were a real political debate, I would hope that whoever was sitting across the table from Alex Jones would ask him to back up some of his more outrageous claims with specific evidence and research. But I mean, this wasn't. This was just an interview with Billy Corgan about stuff. So I'm not going to hold Billy Corgan up to the standards of Richard Dawkins or somebody doing a full-blown debate with Alex Jones. So actually, overall, I think Billy acquitted himself quite well on this. There are definitely things he said that I don't agree with, but there are also some things that he talked about I do agree with. He talked about Joseph Kony quite a bit, the Kony 2012 campaign that I'm sure no one has been able to escape hearing about. In case you have, in short, a viral video came out a few weeks ago talking about this gentleman, Joseph Kony, who was the leader of a group in Africa that was enslaving and slaughtering children and recruiting children for his army and things like that. And it's all very terrible. And this video was, a call to arms for people to, talk to your political leaders and get justice for this man. And very quickly, within a day or two, people started to actually look into this, and more details started to arise about, the fact that Joseph Kony, a lot of the actions they were describing, this was 5 or 6 years ago, and it's not exactly what they were saying in this video. So I don't think that the video was successful in, getting this huge revolution, but it did get a lot of attention. And Billy talked a lot about how after this video got posted, he was someone that people went to as not a political figure, but a well-known figure, as, hey, Billy, like, what do you think about this Kony thing? Get involved, you're an important person who has the ear of important people. Why don't you go tell them to, bring Joseph Kony to justice? And Billy wouldn't do that. He said he wanted to think about it and look into it before he did anything like that. And he said that the reaction of some people after he did that was that, oh, like, what's the matter? Like, you're against children or something like that. And I agree with him that stuff like that does happen. Like, whenever there is a movement, it gets boiled down to either you agree with everything about this, or you hate children, or you are a Nazi or something like that. And I mean, I totally agree with Billy that it's important to look into things before you dive in and become part of something, even if it's the popular thing on Twitter at the time. And this is not anything new for Billy. If you remember when the song Glynis came out many, many years ago, there was a little audio clip of the MP3 that I have of Glynis, at least. I forget exactly where it came from, but there's a little clip of Billy talking, and he says something about, I don't subscribe to the politics of AIDS and things like that, but, this was a case where, we were trying to help a single person, so I recorded this song and took part in this no alternative thing that Glynis was a part of. So, I mean, this is kind of similar to that Billy doesn't necessarily believe in the politics of everything around this Joseph Kony video, but of course Billy doesn't hate children or anything like that.
let me chip in with another example quickly. In 2007, the Pumpkins went to play Live Earth, and Billy got a lot of criticism because he didn't say anything about the cause, really. Not much of anything, and he did say, we got a new album coming out. So he was criticized for basically being all about music and about his band when this event was supposed to be about, whatever the heck it was supposed to be about, right? But, I'm sure a lot of people are like, Billy Corgan doesn't care about the environment, man. He doesn't care about the planet. Yeah,
there are true believers on both sides. People like to, accuse the people who believe in UFOs and that kinds of things of being true believers, because there is no evidence that will sway them, and that's true. But I think there's also true believers on the other side, like in things like the Green Movement and stuff like that are also unwilling to hear any sort of evidence. So I think that's just what Billy's trying to avoid, becoming part of one of those camps.
Yeah, during the Alex Jones interview, Billy says something like, he's never criticized more than when he raises questions about, narratives around climate change or whatever. And then he immediately, as an example, he said, if he raises questions about a possible carbon tax, right?
Yep.
And to me, there's a really important distinction between the question of, is our climates getting hotter? And the question of what we are to do about it.
Absolutely. I agree 100%.
Question A, I think is, there seems to be pretty much a consensus among the people who really study this, right? And, I think Billy, you pin him down, I think he would kind of defer to those people. I mean, he seems willing to question it, which, is fine. I think a lot of people, do wonder about this or that. And, you can argue, lots of people have pointed out, hey, the climate scientists have been wrong before, right? And now maybe 40 years later, they're smarter, right? And they probably are. I don't really doubt the consensus, but it seems to be very few people who do, right? But the question of what to do about it, I mean, to me is totally wide open, And
yeah, I would say there's a scientific debate and there's a political debate, and I think sometimes some of the parties like to, in the name of their political position, try and throw sand on the scientific position or twist the scientific position around. But in general, you're exactly right. I think that the idea that there is this trend that the Earth is warming is not a debate. It's like many studies have been done. There's a lot of data that says that.
Yeah.
And then there's additional questions with climate change around, first of all, the Earth is warming, but the climate of the Earth has constantly been changing, obviously, for millions of years. So is this a problem, and is this man-made? And that's also, I think, more of a scientific debate that's more ongoing. I think that there is a bit of a consensus that, man has caused a lot of the change that's going on right now. But what you're saying and what Billy said, you're exactly right. So the point Billy made is that he was upset when he would get a lot of grief when he would question a carbon tax. And the idea of a carbon tax that has nothing to do with the scientific debate of climate change. That is all about the political debate of what do we do about it, if anything, about climate change.
Yeah, I mean, people who have listened to this podcast a long time probably know I'm an economics student. And I wrote in the comments on one of the recent on the post about Alex Jones. I mean, the idea that a carbon tax is like that there's some science, some hard ass science that supports that that's the right policy. There's nothing like that. I mean, it's totally open-ended debate. So there's a million ways to go about fixing any problem, which includes maybe just flat tolerating it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So and just carrying on. So
I mean, there's one part of what Billy said about the climate change thing that I did take issue with, and that's he made a point about, when there's a lot of corporate money behind something, how can a liberal class be comfortable with that relationship? And I think he pointed out something about Monsanto being on the side of the green movement. And yeah, I think this is kind of a logical fallacy where if you have an idea or a belief and a corporation either happens to agree with you or happens to be benefited by that idea somehow is flawed. And unfortunately, with this climate change issue, there's corporate money on both sides. There's corporations that are in favor of carbon taxes and doing things like that because they would benefit from it, and there are corporations and lobbies that would benefit from not doing that. So I don't think in this debate you can have a position that is not also espoused by what one side or the other could consider an evil corporation.
So, should Billy have gone on Alex Jones? Chris, is even talking to Alex Jones in Alex Jones's studio helping perpetuate the cause of pseudoscience and conspiracy theories of the probably false kind? Like you said, this was the Alex Jones show. He's a guest of Alex Jones in Alex Jones's studio. You're not going to go in there and, be a real douche, and bring it to Alex Jones, right? I mean, but that's why the question then becomes, should you have gone on at all, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question, and I think that, I won't say whether he should or shouldn't have. I think that I don't think going on the show hurt the cause of science and rationalism or anything like that. I guess you could argue that a famous person giving credence to someone like Alex Jones, who espouses a lot of anti-rationalistic conspiracy theories, that props him up, that gets him web traffic and gives him money and gets him attention, and that makes his movement more visible. But at the same time, you can't just entirely ignore someone and expect them to go away. You do have to engage with them somehow, and if you are going to engage with them, you're right, you can't go on their show, on their turf, and just rip into them and expect that that's going to be, that you're going to win. I could not go on Alex Jones's program, and I would not consider myself at all a good scientific debater, but even someone who would consider themselves that, I don't think would be able to go on Alex Jones's show and debate him so skillfully that anyone listening to his show would change their mind and come back to the side of rationalism. I don't think that's going to happen. I think if you're going to go on his show, you have to do kind of what Billy did and just not blindly agree with everything he says, and make sure that the points you are making are really what you believe and what you want to say, and not get caught up in what Alex Jones' agenda is, that everything in the world is caused by some sort of corporate new world order that's trying to control things. I mean, I don't want to make up a straw man here, but a lot of what he was saying seems to be this fear of corporate involvement in things and fear that there is a all-controlling body of people that, you know, want to strip away all of our freedoms or something like that. So, I mean, I really have no problem with Billy going on the show. The only time Billy, I thought, really slipped up a little bit and kind of got out of, you know, just kind of making the points he was trying to make that were fairly reasonable was he had a little throwaway line, you know, near the end of the show. It started to go off the rails a little bit. Alex Jones started to talk more and Billy talked less, and as a result there was some more conspiracy stuff being talked about, and Billy just throws out this line about Ayn Rand being a member of the Illuminati, just like it wasn't discussed at all. Like she's just like, oh, and I read the other day that she was a member of the Illuminati, and then they moved on.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been a moderate fan of Alex Jones, and when I say fan, I think more a fan of the entertainment value of his radio program than anything else. I have been known to sometimes put on his show on the radio if there's nothing else that's pleasing me in my car. And he's really, I mean, he's kind of wacky, but he's not as wacky as, I mean, some of the other things that are out there. Like, he's not really talking about UFOs or Atlanteans or
does he get into the lizard people thing, you know, that all high-ranking government officials are descend from aliens or are lizard people or something like that?
He's really on this thing about this idea of a classical, he always harks back to this idea of a classical democracy. It's very Enlightenment, right? Like the 18th century, the Constitution, our founders, liberties. And he thinks that that's being, you know, diluted by corporate intrusions into our life. And, you know, and he does take it to this level where there's this conspiracy where elites, the globalists.
Them, they. He made so many references in this to them and they.
are sitting around and plotting, you know. And I don't know. I think there's something compelling about Alex Jones to me. I don't really, I can't really put my finger on it, but.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, I think a lot of what Alex Jones raises are, you know, interesting. A lot of it is actually quite real, but when I say it's real, I mean the events are real, but the imagined, like, diabolical, like, conspiracy behind it is probably not real, you know, like, and very probably not real. So it's, you know, like, so he may have, like, it's kind of sad because I look at him and, like, I kind of feel this sympathy for him. Is like this man struggling to understand the world, but, like, kind of has this view of, like, everything that is being deliberately caused by some committee somewhere, you know, and that I don't really agree with.
Yeah, my main reaction to all conspiracy theorists is I kind of feel bad for them because it must be scary to think that, you know, you really have no control over anything and there's some other people that are controlling, like, every important aspect of your life, or that, you know, that everything that happens is a sign of some greater evil that's trying to swoop in. And it's just that kind of worldview. If I believed that, I would be very scared all the time.
You know, Jones is often described as a libertarian, and I mean, I basically consider myself a libertarian. And what's strange about Jones's, like, variety of political thought is that in libertarianism there's a concept called spontaneous order, which basically says we don't need a central planning committee to organize society, right? Because people following their own interests locally generates a wider order spontaneously, right? That's the concept. Alex Jones seems not to have gotten the memo on spontaneous order, which is strange to me because it seems so fundamental to so many libertarians' thought. he basically thinks, even though America doesn't have a central planning committee a la the Soviet Union, we still do. It's just secret.
It's just
right?
secret.
Yeah. And
any lack of evidence of that is proof that they're just really good at hiding it.
Yeah. So that's strange to me. But
the only other thing that Billy said that I really take issue with was later on in the show, he said something along the lines of, it's fine that people disagree with me, as long as you do so because of personal intuition. The only other option is if you disagree with me, you're a corporate robot that's like being controlled by outside forces.
A robot.
And I would argue that there's a third option that I can disagree with Billy because the premise that he is arguing in that particular case is not based on any sort of evidence, which is how I feel about his belief in chemtrails. It's not personal intuition that tells me that the government isn't spraying mind control chemicals in the sky to suppress free expression or to make us sick. I mean, it's the fact that there's no evidence that this is the case and no evidence that their resulting goal of making us sick is actually happening. So
Chris, just look in the sky, man. I mean, you can totally tell a chemtrail from a normal contrail. I mean, just look at the way they diffuse. I mean, it's obvious to anyone with knowledge of how these things work.
They're all chemtrails, Jason. There are no normal contrails.
You're just not looking closely enough.
But I mean, at the same time, as far as I'm aware, at least, I mean, and then again, maybe they're just doing a really good job, but there are no corporate interests that are pumping out a message that chemtrails aren't real. It's not like there's a concerted anti-chemtrails lobby that is founded by Apple or something like that, So I don't see what corporate brainwashing could be going on here. So I would take issue with that, but I don't think that overall, I think what Billy was saying on this show about how you need to question authority and question things that are told to you that you haven't personally looked into. I would agree with that. I think it's valid. I don't think you always need to, if there is someone who is a climate scientist, for instance, who says they have this data that shows something, and other climate scientists have said the same thing, and they've done their own independent studies, I don't think that, it's necessarily that important for me to do my own study to try and agree or disagree with them. But in general, and especially in terms of political discussion, I would agree with what Billy has said in this interview. It definitely, I would say, was not an explosive interview. The awakening has begun. I mean, it just wasn't.
I wouldn't be surprised to see Billy kind of fall silent on the chemtrails thing, and not because and here's why. My perception of Billy is that he's really only started thinking about political philosophy in the last 5 or 6 years. Like when he told the story, like he's holed up in Arizona or wherever working on Zeitgeist, and he's watching cable news all the time, right? And I feel like that's pretty much the first time in his life he was really doing that. And I think falling into stuff like belief in chemtrails or whatever is kind of, forgive me the Carlsism here. It's kind of entry level political philosophy. You know what I mean? You see teenagers and stuff getting sucked into belief in that sort of thing, right?
Well, I was just going to say, when I was a kid and a teenager, there is not a book about spontaneous combustion or UFOs or Atlantis that I did not read.
Exactly.
I loved that stuff.
And and I don't want to overdraw this because people say all the time, Billy Corgan is trapped in teenagerdom. His songs are so emo. He's never grown up. I don't think that's true generally, but I think on the political philosophy that actually is true, though I don't think I've ever seen anybody say that about Billy with regard to political philosophy. But I'm saying it now. I think he hasn't really thought about politics for very long. And I think you see, if you watched his interviews in a line over the last 5 years, I think I see increasing sophistication almost on an interview-by-interview basis, And I think for him to be able to sit there and talk for an hour about political philosophy and do basically and related issues of culture and come off pretty good, pretty provocative, not too crazy, is an accomplishment. I don't think there's a lot of adults out there who can do it. And I really don't think he's been thinking about this stuff for very long. But he's already figured out not to talk about the chemtrails, right?
Yeah.
And I haven't seen him tweet about the chemtrails lately.
I was just going to say, it's been a little while. I hope you're right. I hope that he is not going to continue with the chemtrails stuff.
But see, here's the thing. why do you not believe in chemtrails? It's not because you saw a scientific study that disproves it. There's no such thing. But that's something that you have to figure out as you learn about political philosophy. You have to learn that there's no knockdown study for anything, right?
Well, and that you can't disprove a negative, especially when it comes to this conspiracy theory stuff where, any proof otherwise is just part of the conspiracy.
But again,
there's...
Yeah, but again, kind of an entry-level worldview on science and philosophy and stuff is that things can be proved, right? And, older people, have learned that, well, that's not actually true. You can't really prove anything. You have to more like follow a preponderance of whatever, pre-commitments and evidence, and, you just come to your conclusion, right?
Right. A lot of science isn't like, I did a study and this is the 100% proof. It's, using error bars and, the 95% certainty, the results that I saw in this study came from this. Now, please, everyone else go out and repeat it, and if everyone else gets the same types of results, then this becomes, scientific fact, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean,
you're right. It's not as simple as, I did a study, it is true.
I mean, if we could do that, then, nobody would be disputing things like climate change or, evolution. But, if you go back and read The Origin of Species, how does Darwin argue? He talks about, he makes this real, he starts talking about, well, look at domesticated animals, and it's this very thorough, literate argument, right? It's not something like he runs a study and, gets a numeric answer, right? Which is why people can, not understand it, a lot of people don't understand it, because it's hard to figure it out.
One thing that I think is interesting or compelling about their discussion to me, and I don't, I guess this is taking away from the discussion of science and bringing it more back to this idea of politics or classical democracy. Both Billy and Alex Jones seem to have this respect for the Constitution, for the 18th century, and this is something I've thought a lot about over the past 5 or 6 years of my life. Is that there's when I was in graduate school, I was thinking a lot about the Enlightenment and these kinds of thinkers, and early democracy is viewed by many as this ideal time where people could really get together in coffee shops and really talk to one another and critique structures of power. And there's this scholarly consensus among historians seemingly that we've lost that, right? And that's something that Alex Jones and Billy seem to agree with. And when I started graduate school in 2005, I was sort of a dyed-in-the-wool Democratic Party, pro-big government, pro-higher taxes, all these things. And I really believed in the power of government to make positive change in people's lives. And then as I got to graduate school and was exposed to these theories that sort of said we've lost something. We at one time had this vibrant public sphere in the 18th and 19th century where people were fired up about politics, and now it's kind of been co-opted by these corporate interests, or it's been co-opted by the growth of the state sort of squelching people's own free will. At first that was strange for me, and then I just remember, I've TA'd United States history, the 20th century United States history, a couple of times. And when you're reading, 100 undergraduate essays, you have to write an essay and state your perspective on presidential power and the growth of presidential power over the 20th century. And not one person in the class, not a single person out of 100 student essay writers in an undergraduate class at a university is willing to critique whether or not these people, I'm talking about people across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, conservative liberals, not one of these people is willing to critique, to say anything remotely negative about the growth of presidential power over the course of the 20th century. That really started to get me thinking. So in some ways, I think this argument that Alex Jones and Billy are making is really compelling. And I think it's something that scholars are debating. Now, they're not doing it with all the language and the references that, historians are doing it, but it's something that I think is a really compelling question. I think it's the questions that a lot of people in our times are struggling to answer. And I found that really compelling and interesting, encouraging that Billy, who I guess I kind of admire, is trying to think through these things. I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with his and Alex Jones' solution, which is, I don't know, it seemed to be return to a time of like the early republic and constitutional founders time. And I could go more into that, but the sort of the
Hipsters United, a blog about the Constitution. Hipsters.
Postmodernism versus I would characterize myself as a postmodernist and whatever. I don't have to go into that, but I don't necessarily think that we need to hark back to those past times, but as the solution. But I mean, I think that they're really onto something, and I agree with them. The questions that they're asking are not questions that most people in America are asking. Of have we lost the ideal of our democracy? And I think that's an incredibly valid question, and it's one that I think about a lot in my own sort of inner political life. So, in that level, I found both of them fairly compelling, although I don't necessarily agree with all of their solutions to the problem. So, I don't know.
It's funny, I expected before doing this podcast that I would get, that I would go on a science rant and, get criticized by the people that usually criticize me on the blog when I make comments to that regard for, not having an open mind and stuff like that. Instead, I think it's going to be the other way around. I think I'm going to get criticized by the people that I fundamentally agree with for, giving Billy a free pass or something.
Yeah, why didn't you go after him for that Illuminati stuff? I think you did. I think he did, though. I mean, what did we most criticize? Probably this worldview that a conspiracy is behind everything, right? So I don't think he got a free pass on that.
Yeah. I don't know. The Illuminati thing was stupid, but it clearly wasn't his main point. So, yeah, it's dumb. But to nitpick on that and not discuss what he actually was saying, I think would be unfair.
That would be something the mainstream media would do. That would be something BuzzFeed would do. That would be something Gaper's Block would do, Chris.
That should have been the headline on HU. Billy Corgan outs Ayn Rand as member of the Illuminati.
Yeah. If anyone thinks HU is a negative blog about the Smashing Pumpkins, what would we have done with this if we were negative? Okay? Just think about it a little. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, when I see some of there's not been a whole lot of coverage of this interview in the media, but I mean, was it Gaper's Block that called Billy Corgan like conservative or something out of this interview?
Yeah,
like
if he was airing his conservative political opinion.
I mean, to me, the really compelling political argument of the next 50 to 100 years is not going to be liberal versus conservative. It's going to be authoritarian versus anti-authoritarian. And, I mean, I think that Billy acquitted himself very well in that regard in this podcast. And I think that, I don't know, if you're going to listen to him and think that he is advocating a quote-unquote conservative worldview, I mean, maybe conservative in some kind of small C view where he's harking back to the Enlightenment 18th century, but those people, I don't know. Anyway, it's very annoying to me, very frustrating to me when I see people who are basically out to get Billy characterizing him that way and not listening at all to, in earnest, to what he has to say.
I mean, you got a country right now where 2/3 of the people, not right now, I mean, this is just the way it's been for quite a while, 2/3 of the people will identify as Republican or Democrat, right? Like pretty conventionally. Well, you have those people, who are like watching CNN or whatever and like believing that's a like important debate that's going on or whatever, and they're picking their side very solemnly, right? I'm with Sean Hannity. I'm with Keith Olbermann, right? I mean, have them sit down and watch this interview where Billy's like expressing sympathy with the Occupy movement. Then he's saying he doesn't want his wealth redistributed. Then he's like being complimentary to people who are organizing collectives, and it's like they'd just be totally confused. Like, what is this guy on about, So, Chicagoist. For anyone who doesn't know what Gaper's Block is, it's like an online newspaper about Chicago. Chicagoist is like part of that national network of like city-focused things. So they're basically competitors. Chicagoist did a much longer write-up. They basically said Alex Jones is libertarian, and they didn't try to characterize Billy, and they said there was plenty to raise eyebrows across the political spectrum in this talk. So I think that's fair. And would you rather have a conversation with Billy Corgan or a conversation with somebody who's just going to tell you what you already know that Republicans and Democrats would say? I think I'd rather talk to Billy.
Well, thanks for joining us this week.